Welcome to Clinician's Corner. Here, Molly and I will provide you with evidence-based insights and practical tools for addressing ultra-processed food addiction. This segment is designed for both individuals navigating recovery and professionals supporting clients through the treatment process. We will be bridging personal experience with clinical expertise to enhance understanding about the treatment of food addiction and the many pathways to recovery.
Each episode explores key topics such as the neurobiology of addiction, strategies for sustainable recovery, behavioral interventions, and the impact of diet trauma. We'll also discuss practical approaches for fostering self-compassion, managing setbacks, and building individualized, empowering eating practices.
Whether you are in recovery or a clinician working with clients, Clinician's Corner offers research-informed perspectives, real-world applications, and therapeutic tools to support long-term healing.
Join us the first Friday of each month for thoughtful conversations that equip you with the knowledge and strategies needed for meaningful progress in ultra-processed food addiction recovery.
Expert insights,
practical tools,
transforming recovery one conversation at a time. Hello, Molly. How are you?
I'm good, but I'm missing you.
I know. For people who don't know, we just went to London for the conference. We were hosting the International Food Addiction Conference and Comorbidities. And so we spent time in London. We also got to hang out with all our amazing colleagues and have dinners and chats, and which is so great. And the recording of all of that should be available soon. But then Molly and I we should talk about travel too on this.
We should talk about travel.
Yeah. On this to figure out how to do that. But we went to Scotland and we got to spend 2 weeks together. We could give them the insider view, but they don't get that yet. That's just keep listening.
Yeah, totally. We'll talk about that later. Yeah. So we got to have 3 weeks together total. 1 week was spent working, but 2 weeks were spent just hanging out and being us. And we might have worked a little bit, but I think mostly we were
we played
connecting.
And we hiked and we saw waterfalls and fairy pools and castles and stones that were placed in places in 2750 BC.
Older than Stonehenge.
Yeah, we don't have that history in Canada at all. So it was just so magical. And I miss you too, essentially. What I'm
Yeah, awesome. I agree. So what do we want to talk about today? What was on the agenda?
Well, I think in Sweet Sobriety, before we left, this book came out by Meg Josephson, and she was talking about, it's called Are You Mad at Me? And it really speaks to the FAWN response, right? Are you mad at me? Every time you get a text and they put a exclamation mark instead of a period, it's are you mad at me? You have a conversation with somebody, maybe you say no, and it's are you mad at me? So we as a community kind of started talking about the FAWN response, and it turns out probably 98% of them this was something they didn't know a lot about and was something that was really still showing up in their life today.
Yeah. So what is the FAWN response for people who are listening and they're like, this is a weird word. What are we even talking about?
Yeah. So the FAWN response is a trauma survival strategy. It's sometimes called appease, or people might refer to it as quote unquote people pleasing or submissive adaptation. But FAWN really captures the sense of moving toward danger rather than away from it. And how we do this is we're really trying to pacify or placate whatever the threat is. So if I am thinking about my own, because FAWN is my trauma response for sure. So I grew up in a household, sorry, mom and dad. Dad was, emotionally unavailable, and mom was emotionally immature. And so I learned how to take care of both of them and how to please them and how to soothe them and how to manage them. And that was be nice, be a good girl, do good things, and never say no. And what I learned was, this keeps me safe. And so now how I see it show up is I date the most unemotionally available people. and it negatively impacts my life a lot. However, it's just interesting how I naturally even fall into these roles. So, what I used to always say, like, oh, I'm a people pleaser, and I was kind of proud of it. Now, and I want to be clear that there is adaptive times when the fawn response needs to happen. When I am with my boss and they're telling me things that I need to do, it's probably going to be really good if I want to keep my job to do some level of appeasement there. If I was maybe somebody who might be Black and I get arrested in a dangerous area or like a place where I know maybe the white police officers are not safe, it is maybe going to make sense for me to use appeasement or, that fawn response. It is a very, necessary survival strategy. But when I get a text and when, I get a phone call and I'm constantly like, oh no, did I do something wrong? Or I'm always in that state of hypervigilance. Now it's maladaptive and it's negatively impacting my life.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of your thoughts about it?
Yeah, I think what I'm taking from what you're saying is if I keep you happy, I stay safe.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. I would say that there was a time in my life when I was the master at fawning because like you, right, emotionally unavailable, just physically unavailable father, super emotionally immature mom. And then again, like you being the oldest daughter, it's like the curse of the oldest daughter sometimes, right? Learning how to take care of everybody and not only the adults, but I also had to take care of my younger siblings. And I had 3 younger siblings. And so, yeah, I think, I learned along the way that if I could just be, as sweet as could be, or if I like did all the things ahead of time, or if I could like think 10 steps ahead of, my mom or whomever, then I wouldn't get yelled at and I wouldn't get hit and I wouldn't get all of these like negative things happening to me that I didn't want to have happen. And so I was so good at people pleasing that I didn't even know who I was when I finally was physically separate from that environment. People would ask me like, oh, what do you like to do? I had no clue. Oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? Like, no clue. And I still struggle with aspects of that today, like the hobbies and whatever else, like, what do you like? That kind of thing. But I'm doing much better. But there was definitely a time when I had fawned so hard that I didn't know who I was.
Because you're always taking care of everyone else, right? And that behavior is really rewarded socially as well. If you're kind and you're a helpful person and you don't rock the boat, it's really actually very rewarded. And so, of course, that is. But you said, I think one of the main symptoms is now not knowing myself, not knowing what I need, not knowing what I want or who I am. Like I remember too, is like, how do you want to design your condo? And I was like, well, what's in the IKEA catalog? Right? Is like, I don't even know a style I have or
same. Yeah.
Any of that. And so often clients that I'm working with, when then this is true, is like, okay, well, what did you need in that situation? They have no idea, but they can tell me what that other person needed.
Right. Yes. Yes. And I think for me too, once I was told that I could never go back to that environment, it was both a blessing and a curse. It was a blessing because it removed me from the physical danger that was happening that I kept putting myself in because I didn't know any different. But also it was a curse because I didn't know how to function without taking care of people. Right. And all of a sudden now I'm on my own. And it put me into one of probably the most suicidal times in my life because I didn't know who I was if I wasn't taking care of my siblings. I didn't know who I was if I wasn't managing the relationship between my very absent father and, alcoholic father, all of those things. And then this mother who it seemed like no matter what I did, it was never going to be good enough. But I was trying so hard and I didn't know how to function. And I think that's a really important thing to talk about too, is when we start, as we go on in this and we start talking about treating or changing fawn behavior, to just really normalize and validate, if you start to feel kind of hopeless or bleak, who am I without these like aspects or these roles in my life, like that I see you.
Yeah.
I
Well,
see you.
and it's an addictive response.
Yeah,
Right?
for sure.
And that's why it happens so almost comorbidly with other addictions, right? It's because when we have to be a certain person for every person in our life, what we do is we start hiding parts of ourselves. It's like, oh, it's not safe to show that person. Oh, I can't be angry. I can't be this emotional stuff. What do? Self-harm, right? I mean, for me, I think that was hugest part of my alcohol use disorder. It was the hugest part of like, the restriction with food, controlling the amount I eat, all of that, also with the food addiction. And I think also it became the thing that almost killed me because asking for help meant letting people know I was struggling, letting people know I didn't have it all figured out, that I wasn't a good girl. And was times I could have called. I think about that last DUI I got. All I had to do was call and let mom and dad know I wasn't coming up north to see them. And instead I was like, that fear of their response was more than worth my own life. And I drank and drove and got arrested for it. But all like, so that tells you how like prevalent and how, I think like a lot of it is unconscious too. This fawn response is, and how when it is maladaptive, it can really start to put us at risk.
Absolutely. And I think about, like how vulnerable to exploitation we become when we are like just in this hardcore response of fawn, because our boundaries start to collapse, right? We no longer say yes to the things we want to say yes to or no to the things we want to say no to. We're saying yes to things that, like you were just saying, like you knew it was dangerous. There was a part of you that knew that it was dangerous, but that boundary collapse then said, but I have to make these people happy so that I can still be safe, because the fear of whatever the outcome would be if I told them I'm coming up tomorrow or whatever.
Yeah. Or just
bigger.
disappointing them
Right.
with the fact that I had a return to use after a long time of sobriety was, and they would have obviously figured it out if I did drive up there. So who I thought I was fooling, I mean, obviously in an impaired state, but it was more just the fear of telling them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Anything other than that.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. But like you said, there's adaptive and there's maladaptive versions of this. And, and the thing is like, it works. Like the reason why it becomes maladaptive is because we use it over and over and over again, but we wouldn't have started using it if it didn't work to begin with.
Work. Yes.
Right.
And it can be helpful to talk about some of the symptoms.
Sure.
So listening to this, that are some common symptoms when we think about the fawn response. We're talking about behaviors, we're talking about feelings, or maybe your inner experience. You already said one, difficulty saying no. And so you say yes, even when you're exhausted, even when you're drained. And what you'll notice is I feel resentful. Another common symptom is over apologizing. So you may find yourself apologizing even when you didn't do anything wrong, or modifying your voice to sound smaller. Again, that people pleasing, but I also see it as approval seeking, right? Mm-hmm. So trying to predict and fulfill others' needs, maybe even before they may not even ask for it.
Right. This is the thinking 10 steps ahead. Yeah.
Right. The overthinking, right? And so you're doing all this work to avoid that person's displeasure or conflict. Hypervigilance is another one. And so what that means is I am constantly scanning the people in my life, facial expressions, their tone, their cues. Oh, well, this person, always uses emojis, and today they're not using emojis. What's happening? Are they mad at me? Right? So all of that to just know, am I safe or not? Conflict avoidance. So I may feel a different way about something. I may, just be censoring my feelings, and I am silencing my own discomfort to keep the peace. You may also feel responsible for other people's emotional states. And if nobody can see me, I have both hands up. This is what I do. If they're upset, it's my fault somehow, or carrying the emotional burdens of others. We already talked about the other big one, which is disconnecting from your own wants and needs and boundaries. You no longer know what you truly want because you know what everybody else in your life wants. You are feeling like you also talked about this state of burnt out, emotional exhaustion, resentment, suicidal, depressed, because you've been putting your own needs aside for so long. And we get this kind of identity blur. So I lose a sense of who I am apart for who I am to other people and what I do for them. And I think it might also look like you struggle with shame. Shame or guilt about setting a boundary or expressing a need. You feel bad anytime you assert yourself. And then another thing that often we find is you will find yourself kind of in that flop state, that disassociation, numbness, depersonalization. So you are tuning out or avoiding. Are you trying to figure out how to cut off those internal signals to avoid feeling conflict or hurt?
Yeah. I would also say, that feeling of like being like a doormat or walked all over. I remember I was 19 years old and I was waiting tables at this like family restaurant, and the owner, it was a husband-wife couple. They were, older, like they could have been my parents kind of deal. And I just remember one night he said, Molly, you wouldn't get walked all over if you weren't such a rug. And I was like, right? Like he nailed it. I was just so like that appeaser, like you were saying, like I would say yes to anything. And then all of a sudden I'm covering tables while every other server in the restaurant is literally outside having a smoke break together. And I'm the only one who doesn't smoke. Right. But do you think I'm getting tips shared with me or any of that stuff? No. And I just remember that night came to a head and he just said that to me. And I was like, oh, you're so right. I made this decision to say yes to all of these things. And it really opened my eyes to like, that's what I had done, is I would let myself be walked all over. Now, again, that was my accountability in it as an older person, but I'd been set up for it from birth, right? And so I didn't know any different, but it took somebody pointing that out. Nobody had ever pointed that out to me before, right? And it took somebody pointing it out to me to be like, oh, okay, I can do something different here. And he actually gave me permission, right, to say no. It was really cool. But yeah, I agree with all these other symptoms. And, I think something that we should talk about too is like, they're just like anything else. There are like factors that make us more or less susceptible to something like this kind of survival response, and I think about, you and I and some of the other folks that we work with that really identify with this response. And so like children of abusive, neglectful, narcissistic, or addicted caregivers are very susceptible. And I'm like, check. Okay, got it. Okay. And that was right. Like I had no control over that. Who are raised in environments where love and attention was conditional. Again, like check. And I think you're probably identifying with that.
That's for sure. Like I could be loved if I got this grade. I could be loved if I got first place in the race. I could be loved if, I went to church and did all of these things, and pushing back meant love was removed.
Yep, exactly.
My parents still loved me. I want to be clear about that.
Right.
It's my perception of what was happening. And as a child, who can possibly do anything to their parents if they're going to take their love away? We just don't have those brain mechanisms to be able to realize no, it's like we won't survive if they take their love away from us.
Right. And I think that's a really important distinction where I think you and I are on two ends of the spectrum with that experience where literally I think love was dangled for me, but it was never given. So it wasn't even that mine still loved me. It was like a dangle and then, oh, you didn't meet expectations. So, well, not today. Right. Where for you, that was the feeling of oh, I've disappointed them, or I don't want to deal with they're complaining about me not getting the right grade or not making the sports team or whatever it might be. And so, but that both of the two sides of the same coin.
Right. Because my belief was no different than yours.
Right.
And it was that if I didn't get that or I didn't do this, I just wasn't worthy of love. And it may have been, like you said, the tone, the way they looked, that was oh no, the love is gone. My sensitive little nervous system believed at that time. And so it was very real. It's exactly as you said. And I think you're right. It's like in that moment, of course we appease, right? It's like we can't fight, we can't escape. We're just little kids. Yeah. And so appeasing is the only response we have.
Yes, exactly. I also think that women in general are a little more susceptible because our culture really emphasizes that women are the caretakers and so our identities often become wrapped up in that piece of it. And so that, we're taught to prioritize other people's needs for safety and belonging. Like it's literally taught to little girls for sure. And then, if you are a survivor of a relational trauma, attachment wounding, CPTSD, that kind of thing, that also makes you more susceptible to this sort of survival mechanism. Because again, it has to do with if I make you happy, then I'm safe.
Well, I would say that, excuse me, goes for any marginalized identity, right? People of color, people with mental health, people who may be like, bisexual, trans, any of all the letters that I never get perfectly correct.
LGBTQIA plus community. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. And so it makes so much sense because this is how we stay safe.
Yeah. So I'm curious to know if there are like professionals in any sort of capacity listening to today's podcast, like what do you think they need to know? Do you have an idea of what you would want to share with them?
Well, I think they need to know that when you're working with somebody and you're noticing this may be something that they have going on for them, it's going to really impact the person that you're working with, their recovery, because they will have a tendency towards self-neglect. So that means they will suppress their own needs. They'll have a really hard time identifying feelings. So that's like pull out the feelings wheel. Let's start with the basic because they probably most of the time won't know what they're feeling. And so they may also have no idea why maybe they return to use because they're going to just be at a higher level of vulnerability for that. They are going to struggle with boundaries and they will often find themselves in that chronic stress, burnout, emotional depletion. So self-care is going to feel really selfish to this person that you're working with. They are going to struggle asking for help in healthy ways. So their default will to be do it on their own, figure it out, go through it, and then tell people, hi, I'm Clarissa, and this is my story.
Same.
And so, they may really feel challenged by being in groups, support groups. And I find with the clients that I work with, they're like really resistant to going to those groups because they feel responsible for everybody in the group and they take on all of their pain and that might be too much for them. And so again, to be like, what would be a safer way to find connections and resources? You may need to build a safe container for that person first, one-to-one. A community might be too much too soon. And so that might also be important. There's going to be some level of potential codependent relational dynamics. So, we're going to be looking at attachments. We're going to be looking for healthier communication strategies and the real distress that creating a boundary with somebody will cause. We're not saying that, because I think sometimes as treatment professionals, we're like, why couldn't this person just set that boundary? Or like, oh, that looks like that was the time for a boundary. As some people might say, that person that you're working with that's sitting in front of you has a really good reason for not doing it. And let's be soft and kind and gentle and explore why they didn't feel capable of doing that in that moment. I think also about the individual or the professional needing to start to do some exploration around who these individuals are, what they like, what are these difficult feelings that they've maybe been suppressing. And if you are not trained in that, they may need some co-support from a therapist or a psychologist that is maybe better trained to support somebody's needs, because it's not just about the food. And I think, shame work is deep and it's tough and it takes longer. And so more patience is required. What about you?
Yeah. Well, to your point, this is a reminder of and this is what I say to clients all the time too, right? People pleasing or fawning is not nice. We're not actually doing it to be nice. We're doing it to be safe. So to remind ourselves that it's fear-driven compliance.
Yeah.
And so when we can frame it in that way as the professional who's setting up the treatment or, working with the individual, we have to be so careful not to overpraise compliance, because we can be reinforcing the fear-driven aspect of it. Right.
People will do it for their counselor, but they won't do it for themselves.
Right. And so I think sometimes we can misread the easy client, right? They're the people who are showing up and they're whatever, but they're maybe actually dissociating from their own needs. They're just trying to perform because they want you to love them. And we do a lot of talking about this in group. And then obviously then individually, there's a lot of chat with Sweet Sobriety, in the group as a whole, in session, but then in the group chat. And then to me as an individual, and I'm sure to you as well, where people will say hey, I just want to, it may feel silly, but I want to know, are you mad at me? And I'm like, it's not silly at all. I rather spend a ton of time reassuring you that I'm not mad, I'm not upset, I'm not anything, than you wondering. And then you putting yourself into this position to feel like you have to make me happy so that you're safe. I rather reassure you that I swear, I promise I am not upset with you. You get to go at your own pace. There's nothing anybody could do to upset me. I mean, it's short of threatening my family or something along those lines, right? I think we also have to pay attention to clients might agree in session, right? To avoid that disapproval. So we have to be really careful. Like you said, there's a very good reason for the thing that they did. So we have to be very careful about how we talk to people. And this is why trauma-informed lens training is so important, because those individuals might agree as we're in session. And then, like you said, then they leave, because it's not really about what happens in session. It's about what happens in between. So then they leave and then they don't follow through for one reason or another, right? Maybe because they actually can't, because they don't have the resources or tools or skills to use tools that they have, or maybe it's not really something that actually lines up with their value system. But again, they didn't want to be rejected by the group. They didn't want to be kicked out, or maybe it's an individual session and they don't want you to abandon them, right? And so that attention to boundaries and authenticity and safe relationship modeling is really important, which is why I love group work, especially a really strong, compassionate community can be really helpful to really support people who are trying to shift that fawn response.
Right. And why it might, I just want to add this in.
No, absolutely.
Why it might be really important for these individuals to be in a support group led by a professional who can contain and is trauma informed, because you can just go to a peer support group and it's almost can be trauma dumping. This is what's happening for me. This is what's happening. There's no resolution. It's just left out there. And a lot of people may not have the nervous system to contain all of that. And so this is another reason why a professionally led group support can be really, really helpful for these people.
Exactly. And that's where I just wanted to underscore what you had said about, if you're listening to this and you're a professional in some capacity that's working with people who are, trying to, recover from substance use disorder, from eating disorders, from mental health, anything, and if you are not trained in some of these things, your responsibility to go get that training. And if that's not like in your value system, or that's not something you really have the time or resources to do, it is your job then to, like you said, like work with somebody, refer out, get your client or clients the support that they deserve.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think it's important we also talk about, how do we start to maybe begin to heal from some of this? Because there's so many things that me as the listener can really do on my own to start to heal from fawning. And first I want to say, you are never going to get rid of it. So, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. This is a part of who we are.
Well, and more than that, though, it's part of your primal blueprint. We all have a blueprint for the fawn response, right? So like we all have the same brain from 10,000 years ago, like it's in there. It's just individual as to like which responses we kind of gravitate toward because of the different situation, right? Like the environment.
We want to get rid of it because there's lots of adaptive parts. Yeah. So what we're talking about is the maladaptive part we want to start addressing. And that's going to be this gradual and maybe even a very embodied process. And I think the first thing we need to do is awareness. Right. And naming that. And this is the biggest piece, but it can also be the most challenging piece, because while I am in it, I am not necessarily going to know it's happening. Often it is the after that is where I recognize, oh, that was me doing the fawn. Oh, I wonder why in that moment I felt I needed to do that. Like that is the biggest thing to start with, is just being able to name it. And the goal being like, maybe sometimes I can eventually get to a place where I notice I can name it while I'm in it and pause and maybe do things differently. I think it's also going to be really important if there are certain people you do it with more, going into those situations, being aware of it. Like I know with my family, I am always going to be the most vulnerable to the fawn response around them, because I just want them to love me the most and see how much I love them, and like love, right? It's like what I want from my people. So I know going in there, this is going to be a vulnerable environment for me. And I'm going to tune in to my body, because I know that when I'm fawning, I feel tightness in my chest. I'm holding my breath. This is a very, very common fawn response, because if I hold my breath, I can think about what they're thinking about, and I can figure out what they need me to say before they know they need me to say it. Right. And so again, I'm going to like check in with my body and see how it feels. And maybe if I'm feeling some of that I'm like, okay, my nervous system is activated. Can I go outside for a minute? Can I go to the bathroom and do some breaths or whatever that is? And I think it's also helpful to frame it from like a parts work lens, to say that this is just a part of me. The fawn response is not who I am, but there is a part of me that feels very safe when I do this. And like when it shows up, I can be like, oh, I see you, little protector part guy. What are you showing up here today? Why do I feel unsafe? Or what about this situation is making me feel unsafe?
Yeah, definitely. I think I would start, like you said, that awareness. And I would even start at that place of just normalization and validation, and just reminding everybody that fawning isn't weakness. It's actually, like you were saying, like this really beautiful, brilliant, creative survival skill that our nervous systems have developed, right? Because our brains do not know the difference between real and imagined. So it doesn't know the difference between saber-toothed cat and mom and dad are going to be mad at me if I don't drive up north to see them this weekend. Right? Those two things feel the same to that part of our brain that's responsible for these different responses. Right. And so, like you didn't choose it, but like you were saying, you can learn these new ways, that it comes with grief, and you might realize how much of yourself you've silenced as you start to do some of this work that we're talking about.
This is huge. I think we need to talk more about this. From what comes up for so many people is like, I spent my whole life doing this, and look at all the years I've lost. So
yeah, it's huge, right? And that we need to name it so that when people are doing this work, it's not like a surprise. it's not going to lessen like the experience of the grief, but sometimes when we have that roadmap, especially when we have trauma histories, it's really nice to know like grief is a part of the process. And I can so see parts of myself, where I can look back at different times in my life where I made decisions, not for myself, but for somebody else. And now that's not always going to be like bad. Again, like you were saying, like the FAWN response has adaptive and maladaptive aspects to it. But there are definitely times when I think about how can I get that part of me? Like, how can I find that version of Molly in today? Because I can't get that time back. But there is some grief about like, oh, how things might have been different if I had made different decisions, that kind of thing. And so this is where, like you were saying, like you have to go slow. Like you have to be willing to go as slow as you need to, because like I was telling, group yesterday, like these responses are not just like, quote, bad habits that we're going to get new habits in the next 21 to 66 days. These are deeply ingrained survival responses. Like you're not going to just start doing something else for a certain number of days and then that's going to be the default. Like that could be moving you in that direction. But like you said, like that, we're not getting rid of it. It's just a matter of like, how can we have more say over it than having it run the show? And so that, like you were saying, recovery really involves reclaiming your voice. So it's so funny because I laugh about this and it's not funny. I'm not laughing at the clients at all. I'm laughing because of course, this is like the response that I would get when I am in group and I ask somebody, something like, are you living your best life? Or what do you want? And
that's terrifying. I don't have the answer. I don't have the right answer.
The anger that comes, the like disdain that people have for me. I'm not laughing at them because I truly can understand that. Like if somebody asked me that too, I'd be like, some choice words come to mind.
I'll tell you where to go, Miss.
Right. Exactly. So to know that that's part of this recovery process, though, like you said, so that awareness, some of that somatic work, getting into our body, the boundary practices, starting small, just the no thank you, which like groups can be really awesome for, because again, like you can practice like the no thank you, I'm not open to peer, to feedback from my peers today, that kind of thing. The parts work, like you said. So it's not like I'm not a fawner or I'm not codependent. Right. It doesn't have to be my whole identity. It's one part of, like my survival response. There are aspects of my value system in that response, but it doesn't make me up entirely, right? I'm the sum of all the parts. That in those therapeutic relationship places, the self-compassion, we're going to keep saying self-compassion over and over and over again, because self-compassion is literally the antidote to shame. And as you said, there's a lot of shame work, deep shame work that has to happen here. And I don't think that can happen in a way that is not re-traumatizing if we don't first have a foundational skill set within that self-compassion place. And then that incremental exposure, like allowing people and yourself as well, if you're the clinician, I'm speaking to you again, allowing people to sit in discomfort of disappointing someone and discovering that they can survive it. And you have to be able to sit in that discomfort as well, right? So when somebody is silent and they're not saying anything in that individual session for 30 minutes, you have to sit in that discomfort because that is them working through their stuff, right? And you as the client, giving yourself permission to do it in small increments, set a timer. That's one of my favorite things is like set a kitchen timer on the stove, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, whatever feels doable, and see if you can sit with the discomfort of whatever it is. And if you can't do that, or you don't want to do that on your own, you never have to. If you don't want to, you can always reach out to us for sure. And we will help with that. We will sit with you. We will hold that space. Like you said, Clarissa, we will have that container. So yeah, I think that's my thoughts on that for clients and clinicians. And yeah. And it sounds like this book might be a great resource.
Yes, for sure. And I think the biggest thing is like practice, right? And get support around this, because this is hard. I'll say from personal experience, because I have this history of, dating the undateable. So don't send me any matches, anyone, because I will date them. I will find a way and they will love me and I will make them love me. What I do now is like, I actually will reach out to you. I'll reach out to Jody and like, I let you both into my partner relationships so that I can check in and be like, is this safe? Is this healthy? And before I would have had so much shame around doing that, but I just know now I need to practice and I need to learn what's okay and what's not okay because I'm so vulnerable. And that has been so helpful in for just to get some normalization. I can do it for other people, but when it comes to myself, I really always can't see what's happening or how I might be being manipulated or those kind of things. And so I think having those supports, having people in your life who you can have authentic conversations and be yourself. And I will tell you, as somebody who struggles with this so much, is like the people where you can get out of your head and into your heart. So you don't have to be thinking about what to say next. You don't have to be going into it and feel like you have to fix it, that you don't have to go and show up a certain way. These are the people that your nervous system is already saying, this is a person to practice or talk about this stuff with. This is a support because this is somebody who let you know you don't need to be anyone other than yourself. And those people, I sometimes we don't have a lot of those people in our life. And so that's why we might need a professional to be that person because they will teach us how to be in a safe relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I agree. Okay. So before we go though, I have an invitation for our listeners. And so my invitation is to think of a time, maybe recently, maybe it's a big thing from your past, whatever, when you said yes, but you really wanted to say no. And then just get curious, right? What might it look like to honor your needs in that moment? What small, safe boundary could you practice this week, right? As you move forward, thinking about the times when you've said yes, but you wanted to say no, or vice versa. And as you go forward, what might it look like to honor your needs when those opportunities come up again? And what safe, small boundary could you practice this week around that?
I love it.
That's it. That's the practice.
All right. We will leave them with that and we will see everyone next month. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yay. Bye.
Thanks for joining us this week on Food Junkies Recovery from Food Addiction. Make sure to join our Facebook group, Sugar Free for Life Support Group. I'm Sweet Enough. Molly and Clarissa are food addiction professionals who offer one-to-one counseling and group coaching through Sweet Sobriety. Please subscribe to our show so you never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in today's episode, we'd appreciate you leaving us a review on your favorite platform. Your feedback helps grow our show and allows us to reach others who need to hear this message of recovery. Don't forget to pick up a copy of Dr. Tarman's book, Food Junkies. And as Vera always says, the power is ours.